Okay, welcome everybody. My name's Deacon Mike Evers from St. Theresa Church in Earlville here. I'd like to welcome you to our cemetery on behalf of Father Fedlo, Father Casa, and all of our parishioners. St. Teresa's been a part of the community here since 1859. Prior to that, there were circuit rider priests that came around and took care of the few Catholic families that were spread around the area. The cemetery goes back at least that far, to 1859. That's the earliest we could find a burial registered for here, but there might be some older ones, but the record keeping was not real great back then. There's no one specific family that we can recognize as the single longest member of the church, but you'll see many names here from back in the old days that are still active in our parish. This church has fostered 5 vocations to the priesthood: Father Edward Mahoney, Father Charles Corcoran, Father Richard Crowley, Archbishop John J. Myers, and Father Joseph Corral. We're proud of their dedication and service to guiding all God's children to grow stronger in their faith. There are 2 priests buried here in the cemetery, which you will hear more about later. There are several veterans buried, quite a few veterans buried in here, including some that were killed or missing in action from different wars up into 2011. Captain Tom Heitman just recently was buried there. We thank all our troops for their service. Mr. and Mrs. Adam Powell and the John McConville family, a member of Mr. and Mrs. Leo McConville, donated the wrought iron fencing surrounding the grounds. The cemetery board members are Patricia Powell, Jerry Meyer, and Don McLaughlin. Today we invite you to enjoy the stories of Father Hahn, the priest who served us 40 years, Father Wolvers, beloved by all, Leo McConville, Irish farmer from the South Prairie, Earl Frame, editor and owner of the Earlville Leader and civic servant, Joseph Maly, Earlville World War II POW, Eula Knutson, longtime elementary teacher, and Jack Myers, the owner-operator of Springbrook Dairy. Please turn down your cell phones, put them on silent, and if you follow your guide, you will go back into history now and are they back there?
We're here. We're ready to go.
Good afternoon. My name is Father Hahn. I was born in Danville, July 7th, 1885, the son of Leonard and Bertha Snyder Hahn. My grandfather originally immigrated, great-grandfather originally immigrated to this country from Ireland. He was one of 7 brothers, 5 who returned to Ireland thinking the potato famine was better than the Indians. My early education was at St. Mary's Academy in Danville, followed by study at St. Bede's College in Peru. I was accepted as a seminary student by Archbishop John Lancaster Spalding, first bishop of the Diocese of Peoria. I began my preparation for the priesthood in St. Viator College in Bourbonnais in 1906 at the age of 21. I also studied at Pius X College in New York City, the Chicago Conservatory of Music, St. Bernard Seminary in Rochester, and I was ordained June 10th, 1911 at St. Mary's Cathedral in Peoria. After some early assignments, I assumed the duties of pastor of St. Mary's in Polk, Illinois in 1913, 2 years after my ordination. And then in 1923, I was assigned to St. Teresa's in Earlville. Now some would say that I grew up as an old bear, and maybe I was. But let me share with you today some of the stories that might have resulted in why I was the way I was. One night, I was teaching a confirmation class, and there were several young men that were missing from that class, and I learned that they were downtown at the pool hall. And so I left the class and I went downtown, and when I walked in the front door, somebody hollered, "Here comes Father Hahn," and out the back door was a blur of young men. And you know what? They beat me back to the church. When I got there, they were all sitting waiting for me. Much like the night I forgot all about the class. I arrived late. One of the young ladies said, "Father, we didn't think you were coming. We were going home." I said, "Well, you could have called." We didn't think it was worth the dime. You know, maybe I was a little old-fashioned. But I had one time as a young man come to the rectory, and he said, "Father, can I speak to you?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "I understand that I'm not to take part in a wedding, serve at a wedding this Saturday." He said, "That's right, you're not. You haven't been at church for several weeks." And he looked at me and he said, "Can I tell you why?" And then before I even could say yes or no, he proceeded to tell me. He said, "Father, I was very upset the way you handled a friend of mine. At Mass one day, you said to him, right in the middle of Mass, you stopped everything. You said, 'What are you, stupid?'" Well, I didn't think that was right. And that's why I hadn't been to church. Well, some people never thought I'd change my mind, but I changed my mind that day. I said, "You can serve at the wedding on Saturday, and it's good your friend." You know, I was a friend of that young man until my death. He was a great young man. My housekeeper, Ann Sidler, some of you may recall her. She and I had somewhat the same personality. Well, a young Ed Maly asked me one day, or asked her one day, "Do we have to really do Angelus so early in the morning? 6 a.m., then 12 noon, and 6 p.m.? Needless to say, we did, and we continued to 6 a.m. Life in Earlville was good. Of course, as the congregation grew, my time in ministry with all of you, I had to expand the area in which I was serving. I recall one day when it had rained, a rain much like you all had last Monday, short, brief, but intense. Well, in a parishioner that was sick, living in the country, I had to go to visit. I asked Graham Leonard to go with me, and he agreed to do so. So we started out, and we're going down the road, and the next thing I know, we're stuck, mired in the mud. So I said to Graham, "Slide over here. You drive. I'll push." So I got out, began to push the car, rocking it back and forth, and all of a sudden it began to move. And Graham, he floored that thing, and the back wheel spun, and I was mud from head to toe. I guess I just forgot one little word: slowly. A young family came to me and asked that I baptize their daughter. I asked their daughter's name, and they said, "Tiffany Ann." I said, "Tiffany? Who names a child after a jeweler?" Well, I showed them. I baptized her as Ann. Never once did I call her Tiffany. I was greeted by open arms by most of the congregation. Except I recall one time when I wasn't so welcome. It was a time when we were asking parishioners to give more money. I called on this lady, and she had given the first altar rail in the church. I asked her if she could afford to give for it. And she, unbeknownst to me, armed herself with a broom, and the next thing I knew, I was being ushered out the door into that room. Well, life was good in Earlville. Suffice it to say, I could tell many other stories. Many people that I met served in the community and surrounding areas, especially the parishioners. When I retired in 1964, I moved to California for a while, and then decided it was Earlville where I belonged. And so I returned. Stayed here until my death, February 1st, 1983. It was indeed a great privilege and honor to serve God and St. Theresa. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Father Joseph Wolvers. It's a joy to see you all here today. I was born August 2nd, 1912, in Antwerp, Belgium, to Henry and Regina Wolvers. Antwerp is the fourth largest seaport in the world, located in the North Sea. Belgian waffles really did come from Belgium. So did them yummy chocolates. There are lots of diamonds there also. My family immigrated to America in an area of another large seaport, the Atlantic Ocean in New York. It was impressive to have Lady Liberty greet us. We lived in the borough of Brooklyn among a mass of 1.5 million people. We later moved to Queens, a much smaller borough of only 500,000. I attended grade school and high school in those two cities, and when I decided to go to seminary, I discovered there were other places on earth, or quiet places on earth. I was in Zane, Wisconsin, located near another body of water, Lake Michigan. There was no constant noise, no tenement housing, no traffic jams or the hustle and bustle of city life. Mother Nature provided sounds of the wind blowing through the trees, birds singing in the most beautiful sunrises and sunsets. What peace. My theology and philosophy studies required returning to New York and Maryland before my ordination. I found out in a hurry I did not miss the life of the cities at all. I was ordained on May 18, 1944 in St. Joseph's Cathedral, Hartford, Connecticut for the Diocese of Peoria. I served in that capacity of assistant at several parishes in the Moline area near the mighty Mississippi River. I became pastor of St. Teresa's when Father Hahn retired in 1964. Father Hahn had guided the church in all matters for 40 years. Word was, he was pretty stern. I felt like a real novice, but I embraced the church family and truly felt blessed to be loved in return. All of the congregants were important to me, but in all honesty, I have to admit, I had a soft spot for the children. What's not to love about a child? I ask you. What's more important than seeing a baby baptized, children taking their first communion, or children being confirmed and embracing God? Counseling and marrying the young couples of the church would be my next favorite joy. I believe I see some couples I married in attendance here today. Striving to emulate Christ was a great challenge, and for relaxation I would spend time at Stockley's Maple Leaf Lake and Campground. Although I live near the sea, the Atlantic Ocean, Lake Michigan, the mighty Mississippi River, it was this special man-made lake in the middle of the Midwest corn and soybean fields where I felt most at home. The lake was my outdoor sanctuary. I loved to sit in the sun and contemplating matters of the church and the world. I would develop friendships with the campers and visited them often. My favorite pastime was swimming. Some would say my physique was kind of portly. In fact, I believe I may have been compared to a certain sea mammal when swimming, as I loved floating around the lake on my back. I hope you know I wasn't wasting time, as I had many conversations with God and all the saints. I even impressed myself with the epiphanies that I had. On my drive back into town, I'd be on the lookout for activity in the backyard pools. More likely than not, I'd end up playing with the children in their kiddie pools. The children would laugh with delight when the pools were tight fit for me. Sometimes there wasn't much water left either. Indulging the children was great fun. They liked to climb on my ample belly and make me laugh. Their mothers liked the big fat peppermint sticks that I gave the children at Christmas. I chose to ignore the comments about sticky fingers and mouths. My parishioners took good care of me. They graciously included me in their family activities, and I felt rich. There was always good food, especially my favorite, pot roast and potatoes. Every now and then there were a few poker parties. I think I was considered pretty frugal. I never bet more than a nickel. I don't remember winning much either. Many parish members were members of the Horsemen's Association, and I was invited to socialize with them quite often at Shavana Park and bestow blessings on their horses. Blessing them as far as I would go, though I never rode them. I found I was fascinated and intrigued by people of all ages, all walks of life, so much so I would serve as a chaplain aboard the cruise ships once a year. I came away from the experience very enlightening and entertained by the people I met. I guess you would say I never met a stranger. During my tenure at St. Teresa's, extensive remodeling of the upper level of the rectory was done. It provided housing for seminarians and visiting priests. The parish was also blessed with the gift of 190 acres of farm ground and monies from a local man named Jerome Davidson. As I understand it, rumor was Jerome, a non-Catholic, seemed to have a questionable occupation, but he apparently respected Father Hahn's knowledge. It seems Father Hahn convinced him heaven was waiting, and he changed his ways, and Jerome actually took it to heart. You may have known Jerome by his nickname, Joby. The parish saw several changes during my tenure. English was introduced for the masses in place of Latin, and the use of lectors was begun. Jim Band, Ralph Schmitz were two of the first chosen to perform that duty with me. I was always very touched when my parish families and friends were hurting. I hope my ministry of love and caring were a comfort to all I counseled. Sadly, I was unable to serve the parish and the community I had come to love so dearly for 40 years like Father Hahn. It seems God had other plans for me. I died in an automobile accident May 14, 1970, 26 years and 4 days after my entering the priesthood. I would have been 58 of August of that year. Please go forth with God's blessing and celebrate life. Thank you.
Greetings. What a good-looking crowd of lads and lassies. I'm proud to share with you today the story of my Irish forefathers and myself. My name is Leo James McConville, and I was born and raised in Oak Township, the area just to the south of here, more commonly referred to as the South Prairie. My parents were James II and Ellen Garrity McConville, and I was born on August 10th, 1891. I spent my whole life in Oak Township, going to country school for my early elementary education. One year, some thought the school should be called the McConville School, as all 8 students attending were named McConville. The only one not of McConville was our teacher, Monica Larkin. For my first year of high school education, I attended St. Bede Academy and rode the train from Triumph to Spring Valley. Dad would give me a ride on horse and buggy to town, but when he was busy with farm work, I had to rely on my own 2 legs to get there. Those were the days, so I was glad I didn't live any farther than we did. My father followed in his footsteps, and I did the same. My brother Frank and I partnered up, we batched it, and I became the cook. A little bit later, I found us a better cook and married her. I was also happened to be doing the janitorial works at the local primary school. Yeah, when I saw a beauty of a teacher, and I was instantly smitten. Her name, she was from Wallace Township and bordered with the Owens. Her name was Frances O'Donnell. Did I mention she was a pretty one? Oh, you catch that? She was also Irish. I took her back to the farm to live with Frank and I. We were married August 3rd, 1918. Frances pitched right in to keep us men in line. She also proved to be quite an astute bookkeeper and businesswoman. Frank and I broke horses at the sideline to farming, and I used 5 of them to tame the prairie sod. I don't know how many of you have seen prairie sod, but the best description I can give is a big, bad case of bad bedhead. The 120 acres we were going to put in production, I used my trusty sulky plow and some of my horses. And the wind would blow off the prairie to the west one day, north the next, south, maybe even the east. That would push the dirt and grass right in the trench, making the ground very uneven to walk across. My family figured I'd walk 616 miles and spent 6 months to get the whole field done. The time came when we decided to try out newfangled machines and trade some of our horses. In 1942, we bought a 1934 John Deere steel-wheeled tractor, and what do you know, we couldn't get the damn thing to run. I wasn't sure trading some of our best horses for this newfangled machine was such a great idea. Well, the equipment has sure changed since then. And what do you imagine my reaction to GPS and tractors basically driving themselves? Francis and I lived a great life together. Shortly, I fell ill 4 days after my 70th birthday and died August 14th, 1960. I'd like to close with the following. I've known the closeness of a caring family, the joy of laughing grandkids, and the pride of being a good and suitable caretaker of the land. Luckily, I heard. Thank you.
Well, hello there. Earl Frame here. Glad that all of you could gather today to listen to what I have to say. Although I can't help but wonder, there's got to be much more interesting people than me to listen to, many more interesting stories to tell. But it's for a good cause, so I'll do my best. I was born October 7th, 1920, in Neodesha, Kansas. My parents struggled to make ends meet most of the time. It was the Dust Bowl and times were tough. My father moved us around from town to town, trying to find employment to help support my mother and my five brothers and sisters. I graduated high school in 1938, but there was no money for college. I found employment, but I wanted more than just a job. I wanted a career. Luckily for me, a friend of mine from Kansas wrote me a letter. He had landed a job as a newspaper editor in a little town in Illinois called Earlville. He wanted to know if I was still interested in getting out of Kansas. He had a job for me as a linotype operator. Well, I didn't have to think twice. At the ripe age of 19 years and 3 months, I bought a one-way ticket on a Burlington Trailways bus. Rode a day and a half, partly through a blinding blizzard, and arrived in Earlville, the town that was to be my home for the rest of my life. I got off the bus at Warren Willie's Motor Inn Garage. Now, most of you know that as Bill Norton's Ford Garage. I walked north on Ottawa Street, went straight to the Leader office, and began work that very same day. I replaced Cora Schreckengloss as the typesetter, and I was paid $16 a week. Occasionally, Mr. Tabor would take me to the local restaurant. There was a waitress in there. Her name was Catherine Norton. 2 years later, Valentine's Day 1942, she became my wife. We started our married life in a two-room apartment in Leland. I had taken over operation of the Leland Times because that operator had gone off to war. Well, a few months later, I too was called to serve my country in the Army. I did my basic training in Little Rock, Arkansas, where I was trained as an auto mechanic. I was then transferred to an air base in Laurel, Mississippi, and I was looking forward to using the skills I learned as an auto mechanic to repair cars and jeeps and so forth. And one of my supervisors discovered I could type. So there I was, beginning my military career, right back behind my trusty typewriter. Catherine was able to join me in Laurel a few months later. She got a job at the local department store there. A little while after that, I was transferred again to an air base near Laurel, but I was able to hitchhike and come home on weekends to visit Catherine. Now, Catherine's brother, Bill, was also stationed at an air base near Laurel, and he would come to visit us as well. And one of Catherine's co-workers at the department store was a lady named Ann Babcock. She and Bill became acquainted, and they were married in the summer of 1944. Well, my days of soft duty were soon over, as I was transferred to Camp Maxey in Texas for 6 weeks of infantry training. After that, I was sent to New York City for processing to go overseas. Now, while I was there, President Roosevelt died, but the highlight of that stay was that I was able to see a USO show featuring a very young, old Blue Eyes himself, Frank Sinatra. My unit was then shipped to Le Havre, France, and from there we were sent to Mainz, Germany, where our assignment was to guard prisoners of war, which is what I did, until once again they found out I could type. So I became the company clerk and typed various correspondence and reports, including something they called the 24-hour report. It was a daily document that included the soldiers who were killed, missing in action, or wounded. And it was rather a grim and sad duty at times, typing the names of those boys. After the war in Europe ended, I was sent to Camp Grant in Rockford, where I was given a 30-day leave. And it was on February 10th, they dropped the atomic bomb on Japan while I was on leave. And on February 10th, I was given my discharge from the Army. February 11th, the very next day, I went back to work at the Leader office. 22 months later, Catherine and I bought the paper from Mr. Tabor. At first, we did it all. I ran the printing press and the linotype machine. Catherine answered the phone, wrote copy, and sold ads. Later on, we got the help of Catherine's brother, Jack, and he became our linotype operator. We also enlisted the office help from Bernice Harris and a young lady named Joan Harmon. I particularly enjoyed writing about high school sports and covering city council meetings and school board meetings. Catherine wrote a gossip column called Earlville Chat. I think a lot of people bought the paper just to read that column. Most of the pictures in the paper were taken by science teacher Rudy Timmerman. And the Leader was not a typical paper in that we put obituaries on the front page, and we rarely printed any negative or scandalous. We were living in a little house in what's called the West Brooklyn section of Earlville when our sons John and Charles were born. In 1956, we welcomed our daughter Mary to our big house on Ottawa Street that I had purchased from Casey Gender for $26,000. It even had an in-ground swimming pool in the backyard. As the kids got older, they helped us to get the Leader out on Thursday afternoons, though I don't think they enjoyed doing that very much. They didn't have a lot of ink in their blood. But no matter where we lived, church and community were the center of our lives. We attended Mass at St. Teresa's Church. John and Charles were altar servers. John played the organ at Mass. Charles was a lector. Catherine was active in the Altar and Rosary Society. And I myself, along with my brother Bill, served as sexton for this very cemetery. In fact, I was a pallbearer at Father Hahn's funeral. I served several terms on the school board and was city clerk and township clerk for many years. I was also a member of the American Legion and a charter member of the Lions Club, where I enjoyed serving many pork chop barbecue dinners at fun days. As you may or may not know, I was also a member of GMC. That's the Get McGarry Club. It was a poker club that included such Earlville legends as Jim Rowe, Howard Carter, Whip Blakesley, Bob Strong, Ralph Schnitz, Joe Gedwell, Len Street, Dr. Nicholas, George Cole, and of course, Chick McGarry, the best dressed farmer in Illinois. We would gather once a month at one of our homes to enjoy a lively evening of poker, and our wives would often fix a tremendous meal and snacks. I remember when I hosted, my kids would sit at the top of the stairs, hoping to hear Whip Blakesley blow his nose because it made such a record. They always got a big kick out of that. Every workday, about 10 a.m., Wayne Large and Louis Khalil would stop by the office, and we'd go to Kramer's drugstore for a cup of coffee. Just one cup, 10 minutes, and we'd be right back to work, but we rarely missed a day. In 1974, I discontinued printing the paper in Earlville. The press was breaking down and it was hard to get parts. So I made the weekly trip to the Bureau County Republican to have the paper printed. In 1983, Catherine retired and we hired Lynn Hendrickson as the editor until 1995 when we sold the paper. That gave Catherine and I an opportunity to do some traveling throughout the United States, mostly with the tri-state bus tours, which we enjoyed. Our final home in Earlville was right over here at the Greenbrier Apartments, right next to the R&H. We enjoyed the company of such great neighbors like Tom and Marie Hughes and Doris Schmitz. Catherine passed away there in March of 2001, and after a short stay in a nursing home, I joined her in 2002. I considered Earlville an ideal place to live and raise a family, where there was church activities, community activities, get-togethers with Catherine's extended family, visits from our children and grandchildren. I cherished the life I lived in Earlville. Well, I understand there's some breaking news out of Harding, so I'm going to get on that right away. Thanks for stopping by.
Hi, my name is Joe Maly. I may have met you and your families over the years delivering milk and cream to your home. Maybe you met me working at the hatchery, or at the movie house or grocery store. Or maybe you just saw me out fishing. I was born April 4th, 1920 in Scotland, South Dakota. My parents, Gottlieb and Anna Vern Maly, had 8 children. When I was 7, they moved us to Earlville. My mother did her best to keep track of all the pranks my brothers and I pulled, while my father was a shoemaker, making Doc Fisher shoes in the shop we built for him on Railroad Street. My pop spoke 8 languages, and I learned I was quite good at picking up on those. Czech in particular. Those language skills would come back to serve me later in life. One of those pranks my brothers and I were known for worked a little too well. After an explosion in the home ec room, my high school life was over. Work was hard to come by in those days, so I found work in the CCCs, building trails and buildings across Illinois state parks. I also worked with the Corps of Engineers, building dikes and planting trees. In 1940, I enlisted in the Army. I was 20. I did basic training in Fort Ord, near San Francisco. It was the most beautiful country I had ever seen. When war broke out, I patrolled the beaches of Northern California to look for Japanese invasions. When that never came, I was sent to help the Navy prepare passenger ships for combat. We stripped them of anything that could turn into shrapnel. I was in the North African Theater, assigned to the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. I took part in Operation Torch, the beachhead landing in North Africa with the British. I came ashore at Oran, and we successfully forced the French to surrender. We turned east to Tunisia. I was then attached to the 1st Armored, and we fought the 1st Armored Battle of Africa with the Germans. That was a draw. On Valentine's Day, 1943, I was in central Tunisia guarding the Karazan Pass. Rommel's panzer divisions hit us. My brigade was told to stand rear guard. We were told to hold out for 24 hours, but by 3 days we were surrounded. The orders finally came to make a retreat. During that retreat, I was shot in the leg and the hip. I was captured by the Germans. I was one of 2,500 people that day captured and listed as missing in action. In April of that year, my parents got the note that I was missing in action. I can't imagine what that would have been like. We were told to walk 7 miles to a German aid camp. When I got there, I was put in traction, and the doctors told me I would lose my leg. Thankfully, my dad taught me enough German that I could talk to the doctor and convince him to save my leg. And the doctors were good. They did just that. After some recovery time, I was being flown to Germany to a prisoner of war camp, and we were shot down by a British plane near Rome. I ended up in an Italian POW camp near Cervigolano. As the Italian armistice approached, 20 or so of us decided we would escape. We broke down a brick wall in the back of the camp, and we ran into the mountains. 6 of us remained free. When we got near the town of Montalfalcone, we met the Papiri family. Thankfully, they took us in and protected us from the German patrols. There were many, and this was dangerous for them. When a German patrol came near, we would crawl through a crack in the mountain and hide in a small cave until they had passed. Those Italians were brave to protect us. It's a debt I can never repay. About a year and a half after being shot, we encountered Polish nationals working with the Americans. We surrendered to them thinking we were free. They thought we were Germans. We thought we were going to die, but after much discussion, and thanks in no small part to my broken bohunk, they agreed that it was so bad I must not be German. We were sent to England instead of being a war casualty. I was finally free. I returned to Earlville a wiser man, full of energy, humor, and 2 fairly good legs. I did various jobs through the years. I laid bricks for Matt Kearns. I worked at state roads by Starved Rock. I also went fishing any chance I got. One night I was having a beer at Whitey's bar when a woman and her family walked in. I asked Whitey, who had been telling me I should settle down, "Who is that woman? I'm going to marry her." Whitey said, "That's my kid sister. You stay away, Joe." Whitey's wife, Eleanor, said, "I'll go introduce you." I learned her name was Dolly. I asked her to dance. We danced. I asked her on a date. She said yes. On that date, I asked her to marry me. She said, "Not so fast, Buster." She couldn't relent, though. 3 months later, we were married, July 3rd, 1947. I wanted to show her the beautiful West Coast that I had seen during basics, so we took our honeymoon on a 2-week drive to the West Coast. When we got back, I lived in various towns around the area, Utica, Aurora, working on railroads or building various roads. We lost our first baby, but we were soon blessed with our first child, Alan. Our family continued to grow with the birth of Mary Jo, Steve, and Cheryl. We eventually bought the pub that we met at, and I named it Joe's Tap. I love that bar. I worked there for 3 years, but I found it's not a very good lifestyle for someone trying to be a family man, so we sold it. I worked at Pete's service station. I also later worked at Bob Heckman's Plumbing and Heating. We had our 5th and final child, Julie, in 1961. Our family was complete, and I couldn't be happier. My reputation as a fix-it and handyman was well known, and the Earlville superintendent called me one day to be a janitor to work on the boiler systems. My life had come full circle. I was back at the home ec room, though it looked much better than when I left it. I spent as much time as I could over the years going out to Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, fishing at the lakes. I took my children, I took my grandchildren. In '83, I retired. Dolly and I moved to Florida, and we had a blast in the sun in Florida. Retirement was great. Looking back, I'm proud to have served my country. I loved raising my family, teaching my 5 children and 7 grandchildren about fishing, drinking a beer and sharing a laugh with family and friends. Most of all, I loved sharing my life with my wife, Dolly. We were married 52 years before the Lord called me home when I was 79. Thank you.
Come on, gather close. Now I need everyone's attention. You boys in the back, No messing around. Now, most of you know my name is Mrs. Knutson, and I was a first grade teacher here in Earlville for over 20 years. I was born in 1919. That's a very long time ago, isn't it, children? My parents were Neil and Catherine Harmon, and we lived in Waltham Township. I had 3 sisters and 2 brothers. Did you know that I was a twin? My twin sister was Rita, and my other 2 sisters were Vera and Irene. My brothers were Lester and Sam. Both of my sisters became teachers as well. Now, we all went to country school, and after that to LaSalle Peru High School. After graduating high school, I went to LPO Junior College. Now, back in those days, you could get a teaching certificate after only 2 years. So I started teaching in the country school system before I was hired in Earlville in the late 50s to teach first grade. My classroom was in that big red brick building that used to stand on the corner of Union and Stilson, and I'm sure some of you remember that. I loved teaching, and just like the children, I loved recess. Their favorite game to play was baseball, and I was a big fan, so I'd play right along with them. I could play first base, the outfield, I could play the infield. Sometimes I was the umpire, the coach, and oftentimes the team nurse. Every so often, we'd have a special visitor that would stop by. And he drove a snazzy car, which really impressed the boys. I guess you could say he impressed me too, because the driver of that car was Eula Knutson, who became my husband. We had met at a dance in Waltham and were married in 1944. Now, did I mention that we loved to dance? Even after our daughter Paula was born, we would take her to the Oddfellows Hall, set her up on the stage where she'd play with the other children, and the adults would dance. A lot of people said Arnold and I were the best dancers around. Well, I don't know about that, but I do know we love to dance. We lived in Waltham for about 5 years before heading north to Earlville, and eventually making our home on Talley Street, which is just a couple blocks from the school. We were members of St. Teresa's Catholic Church, and I was involved in Altar and Rosary Society, as well as teaching catechism class for over 20 years. Now, as teachers, we're called upon to challenge our students. But in reality, we know that oftentimes it's the students that challenge us. I wish I could remember more stories about my teaching days, but you know how it is with memories, they fade over the years. There is one story that I do recall, however. It seems as though there was a little boy that was having a situation on the other side of the classroom that I was unaware of. I was working with some other children when I heard a tinkling sound. And as you might have guessed, when I turned around, I found the little boy urinating in the pencil drawer. I still smile about that story. I was so fortunate to teach with a wonderful group of women over the years. Some of their names may be familiar to you. Irene Richards, Ruth Rigg, Mamie Larson, Marge Larkin, Margaret Owens, Arlene Gibson, Celia Martin, Jeanette Simpson, and there's so many more. I consider their friendship the most precious gift of my career. Now, being recognized for what you love to do is indeed an honor. And along with Helen Johnson and Peg Carter, I was chosen as Outstanding Elementary Teacher of America in 1973. And then years after my retirement, I was honored to get the Golden Raider Award as well. Now, Paula married Bob Goodbread in 1965, and we thought they were pretty young. But Bob had a way of wrapping me around his finger, and so obviously we blessed their marriage. They gave us 5 grandchildren and 12 great-grandchildren, so I guess you could say it worked out pretty well. Now, I turned in my chalk and eraser in 1979 and started doing some of the other things that I love to do. Sewing, gardening, making jam, and of course, doting on the grandkids. Since we lived so close to the school, the grandkids would stop for lunch, and they'd also come over after school. Oftentimes they'd bring a friend for lunch, depending on what the cafeteria was serving, of course. They kept us entertained with stories of school and sports. And when they'd come home from school and their school day was over, I'd get right back into teaching mode. I was not going to be satisfied until they knew all of their subjects and knew them well. Arnold would say to me, "Give him a break." He was such an old softy. Now, Arnold and I were avid bird watchers, and we had bird feeders all over our backyard. Our favorite bird was the cardinal, and we would tell the grandchildren, whenever you see a cardinal, it means someone from heaven has come to visit. Nothing is more humbling than having some of your children or grandchildren follow in your footsteps. Several of my grandchildren are in the teaching profession, and others have even served on the school board. I think most people would describe me as quiet and reserved, but my grandkids joke that I could yell, "Arnold!" louder than anybody. I don't believe it's true, but they say my first great-granddaughter could say Arnold before she could say Mama. Now, as Arnold and I grew older and our health declined, we moved in with Bob and Paula. Arnold, my lifelong dancing partner, passed away in 1996, and I died in 2014 at the age of 94. We had a good life, and we were blessed in so many ways. And so, children, that's the end of our lesson today, but before you leave, I'd like a show of hands. Is there anyone here that was in my first grade class or in my CCD class? Oh, it's so good to see you all again. Okay, everyone get in single file and get ready to move. Wait, did you see that? I believe it's a cardinal. He went that way. I follow him.
Hey there, folks. The name is Jack Myers. Now you see on my headstone, you see the initials MW. Well, that stands for my christened name, but I never liked it. I'll tell you the story of how I got the name Jack, though, because I've been called that since the day I was born. You can almost see the house I was born at. Route 34, first crossroads, right there. My great-grandparents built that house. My mother, Laura Spray Myers, everybody called her Raleigh. She gave birth to all of us kids right there in that house in the downstairs bedroom. Raleigh was in that downstairs bedroom. Pa Spray was sitting at the top of the stairs with my two older sisters, Elner and Babe, beside her. Well, when I came into the world, I let out a war whoop. I wanted everybody to know I had arrived. My sister Elner jumped up and said, "Hark, what was that?" Well, Grandpa Spray said, "Why, that's Jack the Ripper." I've been called Jack ever since that time. I heard some of the people on the committee don't even know what my real name is, and I'm not going to tell you now. I graduated from Earlville High School in 1936, and like Joe Maly mentioned, there weren't a lot of jobs back then. It was the heat of the Depression. So I went into the CCCs and helped build roads and trails and shelters in a lot of the parks around here. I started working for the Earlville Dairy for a few years, and eventually I bought that house-to-house milk route from Harry Lee called Springbrook Dairy, and I ran it for almost 30 years. I knew everybody in town from that milk route. You know, most folks had a little tin box on their front porch, and I put the milk in there, but a lot of times I just bought it in and put it right in the refrigerator. Yeah, running the route for all those years, I did make a lot of friends in town. One of them was a local vet, Doc Yapsley, Francis Yapsley if you want to be technical. He and I like to give each other a hard time. One time I was out in the barnyard, the kids were trying to get a kite up in the air, and we just couldn't get it to take flight. Well, Doc was pulling down the gravel road. He was going out to help deliver a calf. He saw me, that we were having trouble with that kite. He rolled the window down and he yelled, "Jack, Jack, you need more tail." I said, "Doc, that's what I told Peg this morning, and she told me to go fly a kite." Now Peg. Peg was a good one. Margaret Donahue. Peg, they always called her. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I'll never forget the first time I laid eyes on her. She and her sister Dorothy, they were at a dance at the old Earlville gym. I knew right then and there the first time I saw her that that was the girl I was going to marry. We had our first date on St. Patrick's Day, kind of fitting for a nice Irish Catholic girl. I courted her, sometimes in a milk route if I couldn't borrow my dad's car. And you know, I went and I took instruction from Father Hahn before I asked her to marry me, because I knew that her mom and dad, Kate and Henry Donahue, they wouldn't let me marry her if I wasn't Catholic. We were in October of 1940. In 1943, I went into the Army Air Corps, and I left Peg and two little boys, our first, John and Larry, at home. I was stationed for 2 months of basic training in Lake Charles, Louisiana. You know, finally, I got a 2-week furlough, and I took a troop train up to Streeter. An aunt of Peg's drove her to pick me up. I stepped off that train with my World War II duffel over my shoulder. Peg and I saw each other, she ran into my arms, and I laid a kiss on her that she wouldn't forget. I stepped back, and the first words out of my mouth were, "Peg, you better take a good look at the floor, because you're going to be seeing a lot of ceiling for the next 2 weeks." Well, Aunt Eva giggled when she heard that. Well, 9 months later, our third boy Bill was born, but I was on a troop ship on my way to the South Pacific. A couple of months later, I was on Tinian Island when the Enola Gay took off to drop the first atomic bomb on Japan to end the war. I was an airplane mechanic on B-29 bombers, but I didn't work on the Enola. But we all knew something big was going on, because the whole end of the island was fenced off. But I'll tell you what, if I'd have known that bomb was there, I would have been swimming for the States. When I got home in November of 1945, after Japan had surrendered, Bill was 6 months old. I took one look at him and I said, "Peg, we can do better than that." And 9 months later, our oldest daughter, Mary Margaret, was born. After the war, we ended up moving into that house where I had been born. And during the 1950s, we added 3 more kids, Elizabeth, Loretta, and we were finally able to end, because we got it right, Don. Plus, we had a brood of grandkids and even great-grandkids. Holidays at that old farmhouse would get pretty loud. I'd look at Peg and say, "You know, we're responsible for all this ruckus." You know, our oldest son, John, he was ordained a priest in 1966, and then in 1987, he became bishop of the Peoria Diocese. People always used to say, "I bet you're proud to have a bishop in the family." And Peg would always say, "We're proud of all of our kids." Then I'd like to tell him a story of what happened when I met Cardinal Bernardine at John's ordination in Peoria. I asked the Cardinal if he'd like to hear what a little old priest said to me on the elevator that morning. Honestly, I think John and Peg were holding their breath, not knowing what was going to come out of my mouth. But the Cardinal said he'd love to hear it. "Well, Cardinal, that old priest told me the higher you go up the totem pole, the more rear end you got showing to shoot at." You know, the Cardinal, he laughed and he said, "Jack, I think there's a lot of truth in that, don't you?" I think it might have even popped the Cardinal on the shoulder when I told him that story, but I'll tell you what, I know John and Peg breathed a sigh of relief. Peg, she worked as a checkout at the R&H supermarket down the way, and then a few years at the school cafeteria. I ran the milk route, and then I worked at Marathon Electric for a year or so before going down to GE Plastics between Ottawa and Marseilles. You know, farming, I did a little farming on the 40 acres that I owned, but farming really wasn't my strong suit. One time a carload of hunters from the suburbs stopped by and asked if they could hunt pheasants in the weed patch across the road. "Well," I put the run on them. "Hit the road," I said. Now, I ran my milk route based on trust and goodwill. You know, sometimes a family, they'd run into hard times, but the kids still needed milk. And I knew they'd pay the bill when they got caught up. Everybody knew Jack the Milkman. I deliver milk to the school, and I was known to give a ride once in a while to the kids around the neighborhood. And for fun, I played softball when I was young, and I ran a fur trapping line in a lot of the creeks and ditches around here. And I loved to play euchre and pinochle with Casey Jenner or Huey Duffy, Charlie Wilson, some of those boys up at Marv Masterson's pool hall or Ruthie's Tap later on. You know, business works the other way too. Businessmen in town knew that I'd pay my bills if I didn't have the cash right then. Boy, one time that milk truck, it was running on thin skins. It needed new tires, so I dropped the milk truck off at Bill Norton's Ford garage, and I went uptown to play cards. You know, I picked it up later that afternoon. I said to Pete Yarnell, who worked in the garage, "Thanks, Pete. I'll pay you when I ship the hogs." "Okay, Jack. How many hogs you got?" Said, "I don't know yet, Pete. I haven't bred the sows." Yeah, looking back on my life, I'll tell you, Peg was the best thing that ever happened to me. I used to tell the kids I probably would have been a horse thief if I hadn't met her. Broke my heart when she was sick and in nursing homes those last years. I'd drive to visit her as much as I could before she died in 2000. I spent my last years at the Veterans Nursing Home in LaSalle. You know, I think Peg was looking out for me up till the end. I died on October 16th, which is the feast of St. Margaret, at St. Margaret's Hospital in Spring Valley. My funeral was on October 19th, 2007. That would have been our 67th wedding anniversary. I was buried with my dancing shoes on, and by golly, I finally caught up with her there in heaven, and she and I are dancing for eternity. Thank you.